Hey, hello everyone. Glad you're all here. And also happy to see a lot of interest in Sociocracy 3.0, which is one of my passions for the last couple of years, let's say. 45 minutes or 50 minutes is not a lot. I'm going to try to squeeze as many useful information into this time as possible. There'll be time for questions at the end. Um, and I decided not to go into too much exercises, etc. I just want to show you what it's all about and especially how it can help teams and organizations to become more agile. I prepared a presentation. I'm going to share that with you right now. And I'll also be sharing the slides later on, of course. So, Sociocracy 3.0. And the definition says it's a social technology for organizational agility. But for those of you interested in who I am, thanks for introducing me so well, Zia. I'm going to be really quick. I live in Belgium, small country, with my family, with my wife and my two kids who are out to school now, of course. Founded Eileen as an organization to help organizations in Belgium and around become healthy and agile. I've been a CST and a CEC for many years. And as CS said, I wrote a novel about sociocracy, kind of like a business novel or like a real life story to introduce all the patterns and the principles to you guys. And something else about me is these two questions. I've always been wondering in work life, like, is an organization about the results, the money, the targets, the projects, or is it about people? And is it about making people happy? Happy in the sense of feeling honored and recognized, being in their full strength, expressing all their talents. So what's the purpose of any organization? Is it to deliver or is it to make people happy? And I think as a world, we're now more and more learning to combine these things to create a both and more solution. So it's not either or, it's both and more. And I love organizations that try to do both. And I think the Agile movement has helped a lot in that. And now there's other things happening in the world, such as sociocracy, that are also contributing to this. What is Sociocracy 3.0? It's not a methodology. It's not even a framework. It's a social technology that unlocks potential of people and organizations. Now, what is a social technology? In this case, it's a collection of useful patterns. And a pattern could be any tool or technique or thing you could practically use. So for me, it's a big backpack full of useful stuff. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a minute. Where does it come from? Sociocracy, the word means governing together. Like democracy means governed by the people who have voting rights. Sociocracy means governing ourselves by all of us together as peers. So based on the value or the principle of equivalence. And classic sociocracy already started in the 70s by Endenburg in the Netherlands, actually, where he tried or made his organization based on equivalence and still had a healthy, successful organization. And he described the Sociocratic circle organization method as a way of running and governing organizations. And it took until 2014 before James Priest and Bernard Buckelbrink met, and they combined their agile and lean product development knowledge and experience together with this classic sociocracy experience. And they started constructing Sociocracy 3.0 as a collection of useful patterns. A lot of the classic sociocracy patterns got in there, but have been evolved, and also a bunch of the agile and lean techniques also went in there, and also both sets of principles have been merged because they were so compatible and so adding on to each other, let's say. Something more about the definition before I go into a more practical translation, let's say. Sociocracy 3.0 is free. So James and Bernard decided to hand it to the world in a Creative Commons license so we can all extend on it, work with it, do with it, whatever we want. It's based on strong principles. I don't have time right now to dig into all the principles, but equivalence is one of them. Equivalence meaning that we want to hear voices in an organization, all voices, and we want to listen to objections and bring the right people together to decide without moving too far and going into being equal or equality, because we don't all need to be equal. We don't all need to have the same responsibilities or the same salary or do the same things. So it's not about that, it's about equivalence. But it's also about transparency, about continuous learning and improvement, about accountability. Accountability in the sense of people taking responsibility for their acts and holding each other and ourselves accountable for agreements we make. That's also a very important principle. And the last part of the definition is that it's modular, and that's why I mentioned that for me, sociocracy is like a big box full of, I sometimes say, Lego blocks to build stuff with. And all these Lego blocks, there are 75 in total. They are either a technique, a definition, a little pattern or a process, things you could use in your organization to help you with either better decision-making. That's one chunk of Lego blocks, let's say. So better decision-making, tapping into the collective intelligence, and at the same time still be efficient and effective. Another part of the Lego blocks or the patterns are around organizational structure, and I'll dig into this a little bit in this presentation. So how can we get an agile organizational structure? Also about how can we support and nourish small teams, self-organizing teams, and that's also something I'll talk about in this presentation. There's also patterns about growth and development of people and peer feedback, and also patterns about organizing and running work, and that's probably the patterns all of us are most familiar with because they are rooted in the agile techniques such as planning and review cycles, retrospectives, daily stand-ups, limiting work in progress, and these kind of things. So I won't be focusing on those much in this presentation because I'm assuming that the patterns coming from Sociocracy are newer or less known to you guys. All right. Feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. And the organizers are so kind to kind of gather the questions and help me out with answering the most important ones. There's two questions I'd like to answer and in this presentation and show you what is S3 offering us, what Lego blocks are at hand to help us answer these questions. And at the same time, I want to remind both myself and all of us about every organization being unique. Every person, every team, every organization is unique. And that's exactly why S3 is offering Lego blocks and not a full proven all-in-one solution. And we need to construct our own solutions, and we need to learn to listen into what an organization really needs. And then the Lego blocks of S3 might help. S3 is short for Sociocracy 3.0, by the way, but please combine it with any other knowledge and wisdom you have in your backpack, right? We're constantly combining patterns from S3 with things from the Agile world, from the Lean world, from even nonviolent communication and team dynamics and other stuff. So I consider S3 as a very useful add-on to your backpack in that sense. So how does S3 support Agile and self-organizing teams? That's one question I like to give some answers to. And also, how does S3 help organizations to scale Agile? Let's start with this first one. For me, an awesome Agile team, and I was already saying this when I was teaching Scrum many years ago, has a couple of characteristics or even preconditions. An awesome Agile team needs a shared inspiring purpose. And it needs a clear area of work and responsibility. It needs boundaries, kind of like a playing field. And it also needs management support. And I want to dig into each of these three and show us how S3 might help. I'm going to combine the first two. When a team needs a shared and inspiring purpose, one pattern or one concept of S3 we pull out is a driver, the pattern being describing drivers. And a driver is the word for a purpose, a goal, and it's also a way to formulate attention. Attention being the difference between now and the future, something we want to move towards. And it's important that every team has a focus, has a goal, has a purpose. I've been with Agile or even non-Agile teams so often asking them, hey, you're the team, right? What's your purpose? And then I get either different answers or no answer at all. So like this shared purpose and a way to measure it and follow up on that is really important. And that's what a pattern of describing a driver is all about. I'm not going to go into detail about how to do it, but what S3 offers us is a template, like a 4-step template of how to describe the purpose or the mission of a team. What is very important is that when you want a team to start self-organizing, that you give it a very clear playing area or a playing field, including boundaries. And that's what we would call a domain in sociocracy language. So a domain is a clear area of work and responsibility in which a team can step in and start either doing work or taking decisions, probably both. And it's very important to help a team together with its surrounding organizational players, such as maybe their manager or their customer, be very clear about this domain. And I help a lot of teams become self-organizing. And whenever a team asks me, hey, we're self-organizing, can you help us because it's not working? These are the two questions I ask, like, what's your purpose and what's your playing field or your domain? Typically, they don't have a clue about boundaries. And probably their manager said, hey, you need to self-organize now and I'll step aside and I'll leave you to that. But they didn't agree. There wasn't any contract between the one who delegated to work to the team, the delegator, as I'll call it, probably the manager, or in Scrum, maybe the product owner, depending on the context. And there isn't a clear contract or agreement between the one delegating and the team stepping in about what is it we need to do, what are the boundaries, what support can we get? And I think that's really, really important. And one of the many tools S3 offers us here is a domain and a domain description, which is a template we use in a probably co-creative session with the team and its delegator or delegators to find out what is this domain about. And we typically answer these questions. What's the driver or what's the purpose? And who is the delegator? I'm going to talk more about this, but very often teams don't even know who the people or person is that are delegating the work to them. Key responsibilities, like a list of what are the tasks and key responsibilities this team needs to respond to. Very important to be clear about that, maybe even prioritize. And constraints and resources. Constraints are really important. It's typically these things that are going to enable a team to step into the playing field or the domain and get their things done. So we need to be clear about what are the constraints. Constraints could be anything, could be budget or time, most obvious, but could be also other stuff, such as being compatible to certain standards or checking certain things with other teams or customers, or what is the constraints we play within. Imagine playing soccer without any rules or without the lines being drawn on the field. If you try to play soccer without the lines and the rules, it's not going to be a fun game, right? Because we'll be arguing about the rules all the time. But when we draw the playing field, we agree on the rules, then players can like step in and start to play a game and score some goals. And that's what this is all about. And next to constraints, it's also really helpful and necessary to list resources. In what way is the organization going to support this team? So resources is not only about the time and the money they get, but also what physical or mental or whatever support they will get. Where can they go for support? Very important. We also list with the team, we list what are preferred skills, knowledge, quality, experience that any team member would need. Or what is the composition we are looking for. And we're doing this for two reasons. One, to be able to select and compose the best possible team at the start, but also to have the team evaluate and evolve itself on the go. So that's also why this is meant. And linking back to the driver and the purpose or mission of the team, we want to set an evaluation frequency and criteria. And you could think of this as the sprints in Scrum or the evaluation cycles we're all used to, but also list criteria, as in how are we going to measure this team is reaching its purpose? And this is a general domain description, which you could use for any kind of team. So not only for product development teams, but also for a management team, an HR team, even using it for organizing events or sessions like this. So this is a typical template we'll be using all the time to get clear on why are we working and what is the playing field we're stepping into. All right, it's just a small example. I'm not going to read through this, but you'll get it in the slides to get a really small example of a domain description. Next, any decent team, especially awesome Agile teams, need support of the organization around them. I've summarized this to management support, but in real life it goes broader than just their manager, of course. But one important relationship is the relationship with the delegator. The group of people or the person, because it could be another team, delegating work to this team we're talking about. And if this is the self-organizing Agile team we're talking about, it has a purpose, it has a domain, then someone is delegating that responsibility to these people. Unless we're talking about an entire organization, in that case it's different, but if it's a team within an organization, then someone is delegating the work. Sometimes in theory, but also in practice, we could be delegating to ourselves, but often other people are delegating work to a team. And this delegator, he delegates responsibility, but also leaves responsibility for this domain to the team or an individual, because I've been talking about teams now, but the same concepts apply for a role. If one person steps into a role, covers a domain, same principle applies. So you delegate the responsibility, but you stay accountable for both the driver and the domain. So you stay accountable for, let's say, the playing field you've been defining as a delegator. You need to support the playing field, guard it a little bit, and help the team to play the best game possible within the domain. And another role of the delegator is to very frequently review with the team together, like, are we reaching the target? Are we delivering the right things? Is the team still functioning well? What else do they need? Do they get the right support? Are the constraints enabling or are they limiting? Typical thing to evaluate on, because good constraints are enabling a team and not limiting a team. So that's something you should be very careful about, and also frequently review. All right. I think for a lot of you, the concept of frequently reviewing things is known. From the Agile world, we're typically every 2 or 3 weeks reviewing the product we've been making. And what Sociocracy brings in is, next to incrementally and iteratively developing our product, which is awesome and needed, we should also be incrementally and iteratively delivering, but then let's say evolving our own organizational structure. And that's what these tools are helping us with, to every month maybe, or sometimes 2 months, check in with the organizational structure, the team or people taking responsibility for the domain, and evaluating whether this structure, this domain, the playing area of the field is still the right one. Because I see a lot of teams evaluating and evolving their products in an incremental way, but never look at their organization. And then we get this situation where every 4 or 5 years, a big reorg needs to take place. Everything changes instead of doing small incremental changes on the organization itself. And that's what this review cycle with the delegator is really helping on. All right, and that's when you get true self-organization, in my opinion. Semi-autonomy, I said, because you're not fully autonomous, you need to be within the boundaries of the playing field. And it's a fun game to play with teams, not always easy, challenging often, but it's very important to balance this playing field in the right way. Depending on the team, depending on the work and the context, you might have a big area of play or a smaller, more narrow play, and then you evolve. All right, that's 3 aspects or requirements for an awesome team, but I want to add one more question. There's a lot of confusion about self-organization and self-governing or self-management, and there's many ways to look at these words and have a definition. My definition is that self-organizing means that a group of people can organize its own work, plan its daily work, who is doing what. It's like organize and execute the work. And that's what S3 would call operations. And self-governing or self-managing would mean that the team can, next to organizing its work, also do its own governance. And that means governing itself. That means agreeing on their own inner structures. That means agreeing on working agreements and changing and improving those when needed. And when we're, as a metaphor, when operations is flowing as much water as possible to the sea, like getting the work done is bringing the water to the sea, then governance is kind of changing the banks of the river to have more water flow through. So governance is never a goal in itself. It's serving operations and it's serving, delivering value to our customers. And I think you should be very clear about teams, whether they are either self-organizing or self-organizing and self-governing or not. And that's, again, part of this playing field. And also where S3 provides some tools, such as how can you run a good governance meeting? What does that mean? How do you do that? But it would lead us into way too much detail for now. So these are my 4 tips or requirements for awesome teams. And there's a second question I wanted to answer, like, how does S3 help us to scale Agile? But I want to rephrase that, because scaling Agile immediately links us to frameworks and patterns we know, and maybe narrow it down to product development. And I want to broaden it. How can we create or evolve a more Agile organization? A flexible organization, a learning organization, there's many words for it, but how can we create an organization that adapts itself to the context, to the market, to whatever is needed, and adapt itself from within and not from the top down, kind of like a living system. And I think we need structure. Sometimes people say, let's drop all structure and let's drop all hierarchy. Unbossing the organization, evolve to a flat organization is things I see and hear, but I think we need structure, because structure provides clarity, it provides focus, and it provides comfort and safety for us, because we know what we're accountable for. But we don't necessarily need a structure of power positions tied to human beings. So let's find out a different kind of structure that brings focus and clarity, and at the same time pulls out the power aspect and changes power or shifts power. And let's also investigate how a structure can adapt itself from within, kind of like a learning, changing, living organism, instead of being reorganized from the top down. So here's a domain again, not the domain of a team this time, but the domain of an entire organization. So the driver would be the purpose of the organization, and the circle you see drawn there is the entire domain of an organization. Could be a small startup, could be a 5,000 people organization. But there's always sub-goals or sub-purposes or sub-drivers, we would say in S3 language, that help support realizing the mission or purpose of the organization. And the structure that S3 proposes is a structure or a hierarchy of goals or drivers, not a hierarchy of people, but a hierarchy of drivers. And then we can draw around these drivers or purposes or goals, whatever you call them, we can draw these domains. And there's many ways to take accountability for a domain. One we've been discussing is a self-organizing, self-governing team. And that's what S3 or Sociocracy would call a circle. So a circle is a sociocratic word for a self-organizing and self-governing team, meaning a team that organizes its own work and at the same time governs their own domain within the boundaries, meaning they can create a subdomain, they can change working agreements, etc. They're changing the banks of the river to have as many water flow to the sea as possible. So that would be a circle. And as you see in this example organizations, there are a couple of circles and even a circle within a circle. So meaning a team on the left there has created a sub-team and delegating certain responsibilities to that sub-team. And that's how you structure an organization, kind of like a nested hierarchy. Circles or teams are not the only way to take accountability or responsibility for a domain. No, there's also roles, one person stepping into a domain, because the work and decision in the domain only require the activity of one person and don't require an entire team to collaborate. In that case, it's easier and even better to have one person take accountability for it. And that is what we would call a role. And a role is very different from a function, right? Because in this kind of organizational structure, people could be in 2 roles in one circle or be member of a circle and 2 roles. So it's much more fluent, and we flow through the roles in the circles related to where we belong, where we can contribute, where we know more of, etc. Right? So it's much more fluid. Separate role from soul is something I read, I think, in Frederic Laloux's book, and that's exactly what this structure is helping us to do. So not being identified with a function, but flowing and moving through roles and teams that help us contribute to the organization. Just to be theoretically correct, I want to mention agreements, because often or sometimes agreements are also a way to address for certain drivers or domains. And agreements is something important. At any point in time, the agreements, the domain descriptions, the driver, who's working in what domain should be very, very clear in these kind of organizations. So although things are changing all the time, we at all times know exactly what is the structure of this organization, what is the current structure. That's important, including all agreements. And then you have frequent governance meetings to evolve this structure, meaning that a team might sit together every week, every 2 weeks, every month, depending on their context, sit together and see whether or not they need to change the banks of the river in order to get more work done. And that might include changing domains or switching teams and roles or circles. So maybe a circle disappears because they're finished with their work. Maybe a role is no longer sufficient, and the person in the role realizes he needs a team because the work has increased, so we change it to a circle. And it's not the manager doing that or the process department doing that. No, it's the team or the people themselves realizing that. And that's really important, because I believe that in an organization that all of us are sensors. We're sensing what is really needed. And we need to learn to use this collective intelligence more by listening to people, but also by giving people voices and ways to express their voice. And if you allow teams to self-govern themselves and change their own structure, then they'll be able to adapt the organization themselves. Of course, there's much more needed, right? Because this is a very, let's say, simplified diagram of an organization. In real life, domains could be overlapping. And then there's ways such as linking with representatives to help manage this overlap and make sure that depending circles or teams manage those shared governance drivers. Could be several teams being linked in separate domains only doing governance. There's many, let's say, structural patterns here to address the complexity which is typical of an organization, right? Let's see where we are. So that was a short answer to how does S3 help organizations to become more agile. Summary is evolving organizational structure based on small domains addressed by roles or self-organizing and governing teams. All right, is that all there's to it? No, I'm only able to show you a couple of aspects of Sociocracy 3.0. As I said, there's 75 patterns based on 7 really strong principles. Typically, it takes a 3-day course to start having a grasp of all of that, but there's much more. Just to give you an idea, S3 also has patterns to become aware of tensions, and tensions not only being conflicts or pain or challenges, but tensions also being dreams and opportunities. Any difference between now and tomorrow, let's say, we could call it tension. And as we're all sensors in these organizations, we need to be aware of what is it I'm sensing, what is it I think the organization needs, because often us on the working floor, the teams feel what is needed. It's not the top management necessarily feeling in what's needed, definitely not the process department. So we need to find ways to have people bring up tensions in a constructive way, navigate these tensions to the right people in the organization so they can take responsibility. And there are some patterns around that, but also about decision-making, because decision-making defines a lot of how power is flowing through an organization. And there's lots to say about decision-making, and autocratic decisions have their strengths, consensus has their strengths, majority vote has strengths, and what S3 brings in next to all of that is consent decision-making. And consent decision-making is an approach to group decision-making, which is effective and still pretty fast compared to consensus decision-making. So it's about how to tap into the collective intelligence, making sure we can hear all voices if needed. So people are supporting the final decision, and that we get all knowledge out of and wisdom out of the group. Consent decision-making is typically based on objections. So we have an agreement whenever there's no more objections, and an objection is a sign that we need to incorporate some more wisdom into a proposal that was put on the table. And there's a 8-step process to help us make these decisions in tough cases. So the most easy way is just asking, hey, here's the proposal. Does anyone have an objection? Is this good enough for now or not? If not, yay, we have an agreement. If so, we need to embrace that objection, evaluate it, find out a piece of wisdom, and combine it with what was already there in the proposal. So there's much more, let's say, process provided by S3 to guide that in more difficult situations. But again, it would take me too much to go into that. I just want you to realize that that's also offered by the toolbox. If we're working with these self-organizing teams, it's important to find ways to select the right people, either for a role or a team. So there's also patterns around selection and about the growth of people, such as a peer review, like a team every couple of months, maybe sitting together and appreciating whatever they've been doing, but also finding improvement suggestions. And just like we're used in the Agile world to incrementally and iteratively evolve our product, again, incrementally and iteratively evolve how teams function, how people grow and function in an organization, and not by their manager only, but by all important stakeholders. So it's that's why I mentioned peer review there. And then there's a pattern called artful participation. It's just one single question. I should have put it on the slide here, I realize now. It's the question, is my current behavior the most valuable way of contributing to the effectiveness of this collaboration? And it's one of the mini doors, I call it, little doors that are in each pattern that pull us below the waterline. And for me, you could look at S3 at a whole bunch of organizational structure and decision-making patterns, and that would be right at a first glance. That is what the principles are about. But all of these patterns and principles are pulling us below the waterline. And with that, I mean into our own internal world or into the organization's collective internal world or the culture. And every pattern invites us to become more aware of how am I contributing? What are my typical patterns? Is this the most valuable way to contribute here? And artful participation is just one of those doors, but there's like these mini doors we could step into to go down the waterline in every single pattern. That's also why I like S3 so much, because it's not just visible structures in an organization. It's visible structures inviting people to become more conscious, more aware of what it is they're doing, why they're doing it, and how they're contributing to a better organization. Many more patterns also about governing teams and organizing work, but I'd rather spend time with your questions now than trying to push more patterns into this presentation, let's say. So to wrap it up before we go into questions, there's two super principles, let's say, that we carry and we try to live as good as we can. It's good enough for now and safe enough to try, as some kind of question. Instead of reaching or trying to reach for a perfect product or a perfect organization, is a decision or is an agreement or a product or our structure, is it good enough for now and safe enough to try? Question mark. If not, we need to improve. If it's good enough, we can incrementally learn and evolve further. So that's something really helping us. And what I've shown at the start, it's not either or, it's both and more. Reminding us that there's wisdom inside each one of us. Ken Wilber once said, no one is smart enough to be 100% wrong. And that's what this is about. We should be developing systems to listen to every voice in an organization without endlessly spending time on that, like an effective way to listen to each voice in the organization, each part of wisdom that wants to show itself. And remember ourselves that it's not either or, it's always a both and more. And that's the two, let's say, super principles I wanted to end with. So that's all. If you want to learn more, here's some links. There's my book about Sociocracy 3.0. There's the website of Sociocracy 3.0, the Learn S3 website, in which teachers around the world gather and try to offer good courses and content. And the company I'm running in Belgium called Eileen, we're also offering free and paying online and physical events and trainings, of course. Now I'm curious to hear what your questions would be. So I'm hoping the organizers gather them and help me out right now.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeff. As Josh is just preparing the questions, there's a couple of things that actually resonated with me. Two things that you mentioned right at the beginning, actually, which was the idea of the purpose, which for me is identifying motives we often talk about, and this idea of that domain, you know, kind of knowing your boundary and domain. But really great. Every time I see this, I always learn more and more and more. So thank you so much again, Jeff. Josh, have we lined up any questions? I'm sure I did see spied a few appearing.
Yeah, so I would like to start with, would the PO, product owner, be the delegator in a Scrum team, or rather the customer, ? Sponsor?
Great question, yeah. And the cool thing is that I could use the answer I use most often. We live in a complex world, meaning you cannot predict things. We live in a world where each organization is unique, and I don't believe personally in a one template fits every organization approach. So the only true answer is it depends. Right, so can the product owner be the delegator of the development team? Yes, definitely. That's typically the way Scrum is set up, that the product owner delegates work to the team to build it. And then there needs to be this agreement between product owner and team about what's their domain. What's the role of the product owner? Because that's another domain you should clarify. What is it we expect of a product owner? But also the entire Scrum team, including product owner and development team and the Scrum Master, is another domain. And they have a delegator too. And that's also interesting to find out who's delegating this product development to this team product owner and Scrum Master together. And what's the relationship with that person or group of people? So there's at least, when you have a product owner delegating work to a team, there's at least another delegator somewhere around him in the organization. Yeah. Does that answer the question? If not, please shout out in the chat. I'm looking to the chat now together with you guys. Any other questions, Josh?
Is there a chance where we put the blocks together in the wrong way that the 3.0 doesn't work?
So can we use S3 patterns and in the Lego blocks and put them together in the wrong way? Well, let me interpret the wrong way as it makes things worse or it's not working, right? Let that be the wrong way then. I think the answer is yes, sure. Sure, and again, that's why S3 offers us like a full, what's the word? A crate of Lego blocks. And when I play with Lego with my son, it happens. We're trying to build a cool airplane and we put the wrong block. And then what do? We remove the block, right? Maybe we only discover 5 blocks later that the wings should be more up or down, whatever, right? So yeah, sure, you could be. I often see people pulling in too many blocks at the same time. That would be a typical example of the wrong blocks, like trying to do all of the things together instead of sensing into the organization and the team and asking the question, what is needed right now? That would be a typical mistake to make. But if in any occasion you try some patterns and you practice them and you feel like, hey, this is not helping us, then you put them back into the crate, right? That's where they're meant to be then for you. Or even better, you investigate the thing and you said, what's working in this pattern and what is not working, and you adapt. So S3 patterns, and that's why they're distributed as a Creative Commons thing, are meant to be adapted also by people. So please adapt and use only those patterns you need. Yeah. What would you need to discover you have wrong blocks is these evaluation cycles. So that's really, really important. If you would implement only one thing, then let it be frequently evaluating every agreement we make and trying consent decision-making or describing a domain for a team. It's an agreement you make, right? So be clear about why are you doing it? Like, why would you want to do consent decision-making, and how are we going to measure its results and effectiveness? And when are we going to evaluate? That's the first thing we always do. So whenever a customer would ask me, hey, Jeff, help us with setting up domains or setting up roles or consent decision-making, my first question is why? What is the dream, the goal? What is the pain, the challenge you try to resolve? And how are we going to measure whether bringing in this S3 pattern is going to help you? How are we going to know? And when are we going to frequently check and adapt? And then when you put in a wrong block, you may have lost a couple of days or a couple of weeks, but no more than that. All right, great question. Thanks. Any more questions?
We still have
So,
time.
okay. Why is it 3.0? Is there 1 or 2?
Yes and no. There's no a formal 1 and 2, and so you won't find that anywhere. But what James and Bernard did want to do is honor the legacy and recognize the sociocracy. And they didn't put Agile in the name because Agile is already really known, but sociocracy is not so well known. And for instance, other methods like holacracy are also fully based on holacracy, but are not showing that to the world. And because James and Bernard wanted people that want to dig in to discover more about classic sociocracy too, that's why they put it in their name. And the story goes that they were in the car one day driving, and Bernard said, we still need a name for this thing we're building, right? What about Sociocracy 3.0? And James said, why? Well, Management 3.0 and Web 3.0, and this way we show progress, right? We show it's evolving. Is it good enough for now and safe enough to start with? They asked themselves, and they said, well, yeah, no objection. And that's how the name got there. So the 3.0 is showing it's evolving. It's like a more evolved version of sociocracy, let's say, and linking back to sociocracy. Cool, another great question. Do we have time for more or not?
We have a question. Sorry, I've just lost it. What's it called? Sorry. Could you give an example of a mid to large organization in Europe that is using these S3 patterns, such as double linking, etc.?
Yeah, there's a couple of examples. For instance, in Belgium, we have one of the bigger banks called KBC, who are also working in other European countries. And they're applying both S3 principles as the patterns with hundreds of people, not the entire organization, because that's tens of thousands of people, but there's an 800 people department where they're effectively using these things in practice. So yeah, we see larger organization, even the typically large, slow organization as banks, experimenting with this, but also startups, smaller companies. So yeah, there's many examples here. Yeah. Awesome. I also noticed another question in the chat, whether or not you could implement Sociocracy 3.0 in part of the organization or the entire organization. And that's really important to realize that as anyone in any role in an organization, you could try the patterns for yourself or within your own team. So you don't need an organizational change program or CEO approval or whatever to start experimenting with these patterns. So just where the energy goes, follow that and start experimenting, I'd say.
Okay.
All right.
Jeff, you wanted to mention something about, there are more questions coming up, and of course, we'd love to continue, but in the interest of time, we have to move on. But yeah. Jeff, you wanted to share something with the group?
Yeah, well, what I like most is what we've been doing for the last couple of minutes, but then even more interactively, if possible, is like going into a conversation about this rather than me just talking and presenting. And that's why I'm offering a free Q&A session in which we could take an hour or an hour and a half with anyone interested to dig in deeper. So only for Coach Retreat participants, next week, Thursday from 10 a.m. Central European time, so Brussels time. And if you want to register, you need to scan the QR code. I'm going to be handing out the slides, so you could download the slides later for registering. But I just want to offer this to you guys as a way to continue the interaction, ask your questions, and get into more depth, let's say, and also more interaction, so I understand better what your question and context is all about. So if you're interested in talking more or continuing this conversation, then feel free to subscribe.
Jeff, there's some clarification in the chat. Is that September or October?
Oh, shit, September, yes. Sorry,
That's
I said
right.
Next week, right? I should change. I'll change the slide when I hand it out for download. No, it's next week.
Yeah, so it's Thursday, 24th of
September, yes.
11:30 CET. Okay, that's wonderful.
Let me change it right now, right?
No problem. There you go, done. Thank you so much, Jeff. It's
Thanks,
always a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you all.
a round of applause for Jeff. So before we head into break, just a couple of things again. I want to obviously thank Jeff. Thank you all for staying with us. Do stay with us. We've got lots more fun to come. We're looking forward to welcoming Carlo Giardinetti, who's going to be talking about amazing things. That's all I'm going to say. One not to be missed. So I'll introduce that in due course. Thank you again to our sponsors, Macquarie, Beliminal, Jesse Fuel, Hyperdrive, and Miro. Remember the Beliminal after party. Don't miss that. Also, share online. Do share on social media, ACR Online. And the Zoom room will be open for the remainder of the break, back at 11:05 or 11 UK for Carlo's session. So look forward to seeing you then.
Mics are now open. Maybe Jeff, you could answer a couple of questions now during the breaks. But mics are now open, so feel free to have a chat.
Yeah, I'll stay in, and I'll also be skimming through the chat for other questions to answer. So feel free to talk with me right now.
So I'll throw a question. I'll throw just a general question. Hello, I'm Anthony. I'm down here in Melbourne, sunny Australia.
Oh, wow.
Or it's nighttime here now. Yeah, the background's all fake. You don't want to look outside.
I imagined it was.
All right, and it's I've only come from a different meetup, and I know we've been talking about sociocracy, etc. I'm going to throw a real curveball in there. So when is command and control appropriate?
And what do you mean with command and control then, Anthony?
Great question. Clear commands and directions on what needs to be done.
Yeah. Well, I think it has time and places. I would never abandon it completely. For instance, one of my best friends worked with the fire department. When they're out on an intervention, I want them to have clear, centralized command and control, right? And when they get back into the, what is it called? The fireman's buildings, then they could get into consent decisions about who's cleaning the kitchen, right? So different situations like crisis situations, maybe specific types of work, but also I've seen teams realizing that the nature of their work requires coordination, and that central coordination is better than team coordination. And so I've seen cases where the team has in consent decided to create a coordinator or manager or whatever kind of role together in consent. So without any objections, selecting a person into it for a certain period with reviews, cycling criteria. And then you get like command and control within equivalence, right? It would no longer be command and control in the sense of the word we're often using it, but some kinds of work, some teams, depending on their background, maturity, etc., might benefit from this central coordination, definitely. Yeah.
Especially if the firefighter's brand new and he's been in the job 2 days.
Yeah, sure, definitely. You don't want him to do anything else than what the officer says. Sure.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There was a great question earlier from Monica. I'll just put it in the chat. How do you know that the organization is mature enough for Sociocracy 3.0?
Well, I think whether the question should be, is the organization mature enough, or is my team mature enough, or am I mature enough? And mature enough for me would only mean ready and willing to start learning. And I think organizations as a whole could be mature enough and willing to learn, but I more often see teams that want to learn. Because it doesn't really require a number of years of experience or a certain maturity to start experimenting with the S3 principles. Start small, start where currently there's energy, things are lacking, start within your own team and see what it brings, right? So I don't really believe in these maturity levels and that you can only start experimenting with S3 on a certain maturity level now. But whenever a customer asks me like, hey, can you bring in S3 for more participation or whatever the goal is, I'm going to first ask why and understand why. And then I'm going to ask, anyone delegating that task to me, are you willing to look into the mirror? Because it's going to be confronting. It's going to be a learning trajectory. It's not going to be me telling your people what to do, but it's going to be you guys changing your behavior, changing your inner patterns. Are you ready for that? So I do make teams and people and C-level groups aware of the fact that bringing in S3 patterns, who they might first conceive as only visual structures, that they'll pull them down into their inner world. And I do check they're ready for that in many different ways. But whenever I feel there's potential and these people say, yeah, let's try and see whatever the mirror shows us, then you're ready to go. But if anyone says, yeah, you need to do S3 with my team, and I'm the delegator, but I don't want to change anything, then I'm going to probably say, no, that's not going to work, right? So if that might relate to maturity, but it's about the willingness to change and to look inside. Yeah. All right, great. Awesome questions. I like it.
Good day, Jeff. This is Chula from Sydney, Australia. Can I please
Hi,
ask
Chula.
a question?
Yeah, sure.
Mate, I think a couple of months back, I've been researching on Sociocracy 3. I understand this is all based on democracy principles. I'm keen to know when you were introducing Sociocracy to the bank you mentioned before, what were the initial reaction from the change management, or what kind of issues or challenges you faced?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's not talk about a specific bank, but more in general. It's
Sure.
always the some people in an organization, also in the example I mentioned, realizing something is not good enough. And this particular bank was already experimenting and working with Agile techniques for many years. So they were pretty mature on that in certain areas. Yeah. And they realized they needed more supporting structures, let's say, around the Scrum teams they were having. And some of their people ended up in an S3 meetup somewhere. I don't even remember where, but they got to know about S3. They read a bit and they started experimenting. And some things worked and some things didn't. And then they started evolving and growing from there. And it's only after they've been trying for a while that we got involved and started helping them. And I like that, because that's people consciously pulling in stuff, not me telling them to, but people needing something and finding answers. Yeah.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome.
Hi. I have a question around if the teams, like you described in one of your examples, are created and then they sort of disappear. How I understand that you do it based on necessity, but how do you ensure it doesn't turn into chaos? Like, are you volatilely creating teams because you think, oh, well, let's just go for it? How do you measure? How do you control? Because there is a need, again, to be there to just sort of say, well, did we do it? Was it for the right reasons we created the team, or we just did it because we just did it?
I'm not sure I fully understood the question. Is it how do you follow up on things, or what's the exact question?
Exactly. How do you learn from it as well? Because it could be that it might end up being that you the direction, it feels like we need to create a team to go through this product direction. Let's just create the team. But what's that? How do you look back and actually learn from that?
Yeah, I think one of the first things we do is asking that why question. Like, why do you start with S3 patterns in general, and why with this specific pattern or set of patterns, and then installing an evaluation cycle on that first. And it's also depending on any external coach or internal coach's approach, but when I would be involved, that's the first things we do. Agreeing on, okay, what's the contract between the two of us? What is my role? Am I able to mirror you guys and ask these kind of questions you're posing? How often are we going to do that? Let's install like a frequent evaluation cycle. And that's important, because otherwise lots of experiments are going on and you have no clue whether or not they are actually helping an organization.
Then there's that other question, Jeff, right? around, and this is about Tuckman's research into team performance, right? About through that teaming cycle that everyone usually knows as forming, norming, storming, performing, but it's really about the dynamics and the growth. Is that's an investment that's relatively hidden from traditional balance sheets, etc. But the truth is, it's well and truly there, right? So you've done all that investment, right? The notion that I heard put forward around let's start a team, okay, problem solved, team done, right? Is about, okay, so there's a cost to that investment, right? And it's about maximizing the return on that cost of that investment. And I'm not just money, I'm talking time, pain, hours, working through conflict, all that stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And what's the question, Anthony?
Your perspective on that from a sociocracy.
Well, I think first, regardless of S3, I agree with whatever you say. Like if you compose a team or even change a team, then you need to be aware of going through the Tuckman cycle again, definitely. I think where S3 helps is in the storming and the norming phase, as in learning a team how to bring up tensions constructively. And I don't only use S3. For example, I also teach nonviolent communication for that. Like how do we bring out our own needs and emotions in a constructive way? And then how do we formulate them into a driver and act on it? And then when you agree something as even an experiment and it's a formal agreement, like for 2 weeks, we'll try this and this, helps to norm. So that's where S3 patterns help to storm and norm, let's say. And then selection obviously helps with forming. Selecting the right people without any objections is already a great start. Yeah.
Okay, guys. Thanks, Jeff.
That's pretty
I'm
good.
sorry. I can see people have got their hands up, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute everybody now, and then Zia is going to introduce our next session. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Bye-bye. Thank you.